I've made a few videos lately which I've been kind of referring to as the DogFecker challenge. And I was going to make one more in that series, or two more, just different ideas, but I think I'm going to pack it in actually, so I just want to spend this one summing it up. Just to reiterate again, it's nothing to do with having sex with dogs, it's really about a proposal that one or two people made about the role of evolution, particularly evolutionary psychology and genetics, within rape behaviour. Whether men who raped, or potentially all men, have got something in their evolutionary history which predisposes them to carry out acts of sexual violence. And the problem with the debate that was happening, for me at least, was that it seems to be people were saying either yes, there's something like a rape gene, I'm oversimplifying, but yes, it's genetic, or else no, it isn't. And that wasn't really a very sophisticated argument. I mean, it's the argument for a genetic predisposition to rape, or something in our evolutionary history that produces rape behaviour. The best argument that's ever been made is the one that I cited, which is the book from Palmer and somebody else, Craig Palmer and somebody, Curry, I can't remember now. I'll find it, put in the info bar. And that was the best argument, and that was a really crap argument then. You know, that was made about 10 years ago in a book called The Social History of Rape. And as I say, it was that's the best argument that's ever been made, as far as I can see, for there being some kind of genetic account of why people rape. And it was a crap argument, you know. So if the best, worst researched argument carried out by evolutionary scientists comes out crap, then really, you know, the argument made by some guy on YouTube is not going to hold much water, really, for me. So that's the argument that I'm arguing against. And I thought it would be interesting to put together, just to kind of marshal the other arguments. You know, if it isn't this crappy genetics did it argument, then what kind of arguments could you put together? And I listed about 6, I can't remember them all really. Starting off with this idea of polymorphous perversity, something that Freud talks about within the context of psychoanalysis. We come into this world not with a particular sexual orientation, but with an undirected libido, as he puts it, that can go in any direction, and it's shaped by the family drama. Now, a lot of people don't like Freud, and that's fine. I personally go along with James Hillman on this one, that psychoanalysis is a form of poetry that allows us to understand things. It's not really a science, and I think that's, you know, as fine as far as it goes. But what's interesting about that particular piece of poetry is that it's kind of supported by the poetry of reality, that is what Richard Dawkins refers to as science, the poetry of reality, in that, you know, it does seem that we do come into this world as infants with a largely unformed brain. Our brain comes into the world inside this tiny little squashed up head through this tiny little gap in the pelvic girdle of a biped, and that brain is just stamped with a first draft of what will ultimately be mind. It's incomplete, it's largely undirected, the circuits aren't finished, and none of the major pruning has taken place in the brain. We have these kind of half-formed, silly putty minds which only take on their full form when they're pressed against the spiky bits of the environment and take on appropriate shapes in response. A lot of opportunity for breakage and for funny shapes to be produced at that point. And personally, I would say there's a much stronger argument, for example, for aberrant sexual behaviour to be imprinted onto that silly putty right there and then. As E.E. Cummings puts it, they fuck you up, your mum and dad. They do not mean to, but they do. And people do get fucked up, and it's not hard to imagine oneself being brought up in a cellar in Austria, or in a shack in the back of a suburban house somewhere in the Midwest, being raped on a regular basis by your dad, and coming out of it, you know, perhaps with a propensity to rape yourself. It's not too unimaginable. And if you don't get fucked up at that point, then you get a second bite of the cherry in your teen years, when the second phase of pruning takes place in your brain, when the the drive to fit in with your peers is its strongest, when the need to form part of that teenage tribe of freshly pubescent youth has really got hold of you by the gonads. And I don't think it's too unimaginable to imagine oneself in a position with a group of people all looking to one another for some kind of support in a very strange world where childhood has slipped away and adulthood hasn't yet accepted you, when you're doing your best to fit in, and everyone is supporting one another in this really strange reflection, this really strange hall of mirrors that being a teenager can be sometimes. I don't think it's unimaginable for something really horrible to take place once in a while in that hall of mirrors, and for some broken people to come out the other side of it. And if that doesn't convince you as another alternative argument for how rape might persist in a society, we just need to look at the language we speak. Our language is very odd, and the language of our words and the language of our minds contains all kinds of anomalies which we constantly seem to be reinforcing ourselves about. We constantly seem to be turning people into objects, objectifying particularly women just through the action of our words without meaning to. We do not mean to, but we do. And with that objectification comes all of the possibility for different kinds of treatment, all of the possibilities to do with exploitation and damage. And I'd refer people to the much quoted Steven Pinker at this point, who also cites language and objectification as potential sources of damage and exploitation. And if language doesn't get you, the top shelf of your local news agents will. I'm not saying pornography on its own will corrupt the youth of society and we should feed it poison like Socrates, but I am saying that the evidence seems to suggest that in this society, with this kind of industrial complex producing that stuff, with the kinds of systems we have in place, with the kinds of language we speak, with the kind of upbringings we give our kids, with the kind of relationships we encourage, pornography is often very damaging indeed. And I would refer you to the list of references I included in my last video on that one. So there's plenty of opportunity if you're even slightly damaged at birth by your dad, by your mum, by your teenage friends, by the language you speak. There's plenty of opportunity to be fucked up all over again just by getting a little bit too fond of the old porno. Alright, so that's the series of arguments about, and there's probably others as well, about why rape would exist in societies, which I think are stronger than the evolutionary psychology rape gene argument. And one or two of the sillier ones that have been put forward, which have not been supported by any evidence at all as far as I can tell. I mean, I think what's pretty interesting about all this is that one of the problems people have had with, I mean, quite apart from this kind of rape gene evolutionary psychology argument for rape, quite apart from its stupidity and its shallowness, one of the interesting things that's come about is that anybody who's suggested that, and here I guess I'm talking about TJ Does Life or Amazing Atheist, I'm talking about Mannix the Pirate, I'm talking about, who else has been kind of going along that line? I can't remember, I'm sorry. But, you know, people who've made noises in that Asria knock, maybe, probably flippantly, but yeah, there was, you know, that kind of suggestion. Those people have been branded as apologists, because providing a reason for something seems to be tantamount, or providing a mechanism by which something might come about, seems to be tantamount to providing an excuse for it. It wasn't me governing, it was me genes, you know, I couldn't help it, it was in my evolutionary psychological history, you know, that kind of thing. But, and I can see why, but I think it's faulty reasoning. Because apart from anything else, you know, this series of videos I've been making, they're not just attacks on rape, they're also 6 or 7 other apologies, if you want to look at it that way. You know, there's no escape. If you accept causality, if you accept mechanism, then you have to accept the fact that some people might choose to use it as apologetics you know, my mum and dad fucked me up. I had a bad teenage, you know, the Officer Kropke song from West Side Story. You always run the risk of that. But that's not how our morality works. Our morality doesn't provide for big excuses. It might allow some mitigation if we're being really generous. It might consign you to a mental hospital rather than a prison. It might give your life imprisonment rather than taking your life away. Anyhow, that's all on rape for now, I think.